11 seconds. You've got 10 seconds. The countdown going on right now. Morrow up to Schultz. 5 seconds left in the game. Do you believe in miracles? Yes! Unbelievable.
The year is 1945, and the Allies have just won World War II. But a new conflict has stepped into our midst, the fight against communism in the most prominent communist nation of the time, the Soviet Union. Throughout the upcoming decades, the US and the Soviets engaged in a war unlike any other in American history. The US fought for democracy, and the Soviets for communism, each country threatening the other with weapons of mass destruction. They fought against each other not directly, but in proxy wars. The Vietnam War and Korean Wars were two of these proxy wars, in which each country backed a side in hopes of imposing their political ideas on the country in conflict. US culture became extremely anti-Soviet during this time, and cultural rivalries began to develop. By the late 1970s and early 80s, the Cold War had been going on for a long time, and US citizens were sick of it. Events like the deaths of Martin Luther King Jr. and John F. Kennedy, and thousands more from the proxy wars, were starting to take a toll. Words best said by President Jimmy Carter expressed the feelings of the American people during this time.
These changes did not happen overnight. They've come upon us gradually over the last generation. Years that were filled with shocks and tragedy. We were sure that ours was a nation of the ballot, not the bullet, until the murders of John Kennedy and Robert Kennedy and Martin Luther King Jr. We were taught that our armies were always invincible and our causes were always just, only to suffer the agony of Vietnam. We respected the presidency as a place of honor until the shock of Watergate. We remember when the phrase "sound as a dollar" was an expression of absolute dependability, until 10 years of inflation began to shrink our dollar and our savings. We believed that our nation's resources were limitless until 1973, when we had to face a growing dependence on foreign oil. These wounds are still very deep. They have never been healed.
In the midst of all this turmoil, the 1980 Winter Olympics rolled around in Lake Placid, New York. The 1980 Summer Games were scheduled to be held in Moscow, and the US was threatening to boycott because of a Soviet invasion of Afghanistan. Since the Americans were boycotting their Summer Games, the Soviets almost didn't go to the United States Winter Games. The Soviets' decision to attend led to one of the greatest moments in sporting history and a major turning point in the war. Coach Herb Brooks was the man chosen to lead the 1980 U.S. Olympic hockey team. Brooks chose his team from a bunch of college players. The average age was 22. For all but one of them, it was their first time playing in the Olympics. On the other side of the globe, Soviet coach Viktor Tikhonov was training his team to win their 5th straight Olympic hockey gold medal. On the Soviet team was undoubtedly the best goalie in the world at the time, Vladislav Tretiak. The USSR team was seen as untouchables and far superior compared to any other team. They smoked the NHL All-Stars 6-0 just a year before the Olympics. Just a few days before the opening ceremony, Herb Brooks scheduled an exhibition game versus the Soviets at Madison Square Garden to see if they even had a chance. Once again, the citizens of the United States were let down by a 10-3 loss. With the games about to begin in a couple days, the stage was set, and the teams were ready to show down in Lake Placid.
Thoughts before the game?
Well, Al, for the U.S. team, it's really discovery time. It's one thing to be young and promising, and it's quite another to be good. And in the next 2.5 hours, the U.S. team players will go through perhaps the most difficult and demanding yet exhilarating time of their lives. They will be playing against a very good team, a team that's better than they are. And after that time, after it's all over, this team will find out an awful lot about themselves. They'll simply...
Both teams cruised through their matchups in the first few rounds, and all signs seemed to be pointed to a US-Soviet matchup in the penultimate game of the tournament. This assumption proved to be correct, as the US and the Soviets got ready to show down for a chance to get to the gold medal game. Despite the Soviets being the heavy favorites, the US still believed, and in the first period of the game, they were able to skate with the Soviets and kept the score tied at 2-all. The second U.S. goal was scored in the last second of the period, and is still controversial.
Long shot, the easy save by Tretiak, but Johnson is there and scores with 1 second to play in the period. Right now the clock shows nothing, but it was stopped at 1 when we looked up as the goal was scored. Right now it shows nothing as the period apparently has come to an end, but the United States has tied the game.
In the second period, the Soviets took the lead on a goal by Alexander Maltsev. However, in the third period, Tikhonov's change of goalie proved to be a mistake as Johnson ripped one into the net, tying the game 3-3. With victory still in doubt, Jim Craig, U.S. goalie, managed to keep the U.S. in the game by saving an outstanding 36 of 39 shots. However, Craig couldn't win the game for the U.S. The victory would come down to Mike Eruzione, the team captain.
The U.S. team is depending a little bit too much now on Jim Craig. He's making too many good saves.
Eruzione scores! Mike Eruzione!
Eruzione's last period goal not only gave the U.S. the lead, but raised the spirits of a nation.
Morrow, checked into the boards, it comes back to center ice. 37 seconds left in the game. Petrov with it. The Americans on top, 4-3. Long shot. Craig able to get a piece of it to sweep it away. 28 seconds. The crowd going insane. Karlamon shooting it into the American end again. Morrow is back there. Now Johnson, 19 seconds. Johnson over to Ramsey. Legoletinov gets checked by Ramsey. McClanahan is there. The puck is still loose. 11 seconds. You've got 10 seconds. The countdown going on right now. Morrow up to Schultz. 5 seconds left in the game. Do you believe in miracles? Yes! Unbelievable.
The U.S. had defeated the mighty Soviet team, political rival and the best hockey team in the world at the time. People across the country celebrated madly. Their small team of college players had just pulled off the greatest upset in sports history. The win was so amazing and influential that it changed many Americans' attitude about the Cold War. If we could beat them in hockey, their own game, we could certainly beat them in the Cold War.
He screamed, "Do you believe in miracles?" You know, and everybody poured onto the ice. I mean, it's the most incredible thing I've ever witnessed. I mean, sitting there, we couldn't get out of here for 2 hours. The downtown and everything was so crowded with people.
At the time, I didn't even realize how incredible that was going to be. I don't think anybody recognized the significance of what it really was going to be. I just remember after the fact, and when we sort of stood back and said, "Oh my gosh, what did this really happen?" It was just the most, I think, incredible experience ever, and I just will always remember it being just electric.
There's this sense that this was just a jolt of old-fashioned patriotism.
To be able to bring a country together, not so much just the sporting nation, but the entire country. It's just got to give you a feeling of such great pride.
Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall.